Hello again. Happy you've joined us for another Truth Outreach program. Truth Outreach is a program that's grounded in truth. It does a comparison between the beliefs and the teachings of the Mormon Church and Christianity. And of course, the baseline we use in Christianity is God's inerrant word, the Bible. I'm Rocky Hulse, and this lovely lady on my right is my beautiful wife, Helen.
And we just welcome you today and hope you stay tuned as we share the truth from God's Word and that comparison, as Rocky said.
We know on our program we like to bring forth two quotes from Mormon leaders, one from Brigham Young and then also from his first counselor, whose name was George Albert Smith. And we believe that these two quotes justify what we do on this program. So let's go ahead and put the first quote up for you. This is from Brigham Young, and Brigham Young says, "I say to the whole world, receive the truth no matter who presents it to you. Take up the Bible, compare the religion of the Latter-day Saints with it, and see if it will stand the test." And George A. Smith said, "If a faith will not bear to be investigated, if its preachers and professors are afraid to have it examined, their foundation must be very weak." So they tell us to do that, and so let's do some examining. The title of today's program, well, today's program number is, this is our 65th program that we've done here on WTJR.
That's a true blessing, isn't it?
It is a blessing, absolutely. And the title is Pursue the Steady Course. That's the title of today's program. Before we begin, Helen and I haven't done any new shows in, well, it's been well over a year, because I was extended on active duty in the Navy and was sent off to the USS John F. Kennedy down in Mayport, Florida, which is an aircraft carrier. And I just returned from a wartime deployment to the Persian Gulf. And so we're happy to be back now and back in the States from that deployment and doing new programs. And one of the things I'd like to do, and I've done, and those of you who've seen our last 4 shows that we've, the current shows that we've just shot, I'm highlighting all the different ships and squadrons that were involved in that carrier battle group. And so today I'd like to highlight the F-14 squadron that was on board the Kennedy. And I've got a hat and some patches here. I'll get these up where the camera can see them good. And this is from VF 103, the Fighting 103 as they call themselves. And it says Jolly Rogers, last time, baby. The patch there, the Jolly Rogers is the name of the squadron, the nickname that they use, Fighting 103. And of course, the Jolly Roger skull and crossbones there is the Jolly Roger flag of the pirates or whatever. And of course, you know, all military squadrons and ships and stuff do this kind of thing. But the last time, baby, on that patch means the F-14 was the last deployment of the F-14. I'm going to get something else here for you. It's the last deployment of the F-14 aboard the Kennedy. It's a 30-year-old airplane. It's about ready to go away. And this is a shirt that they had on there. 30 years of Jolly Roger Tomcats. They kind of got it done like a Harley Davidson thing. It's kind of neat. The last of the big fighters. And the F-14s, they are a great big fighter. But they did a great job. We flew almost 6,500 combat missions over Iraq in support of our troops there, and they did a great job. And we just like to do this, highlight these different folks, and also to thank our veterans from our World War II veterans, Korean War, Vietnam War, the Gulf War, and our current veterans serving in Iraq and those that served in Afghanistan. Without their sacrifices, we wouldn't have the religious freedom to be here on this program.
That's so true.
And here in America, you know, our Constitution gives us those freedoms, but our military is out there keeping us and allowing those freedoms to take place. So thanks, vets. Appreciate it.
Anyone that's had that uniform on and those loved ones left behind.
Absolutely, absolutely. The whole service family is what supports.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I love to see those stickers out in town, you know, support our troops and the cars and all that kind of stuff. That means a lot to those of us. I know it meant a lot to me when I was over there, and it means a lot to those folks to know that people care about what they're doing.
Well, it still does. You're on active duty.
Yes, I know, but I'm not over there now, and those guys are. And so, you know, our men and women that are over there serving are doing a great job, and we thank them for the freedoms that they allow us to enjoy here. Well, without further delay, let's look at today's program. Again, it's number 65, and it's titled Pursue the Steady Course. The other day I was thumbing through the January 2005 edition, and that's what this is, the January 2005 edition of the Mormon Church's Ensign magazine. I'll put this up for the cameraman. Well, I call it, for years I've always called it Ensign. I hear them now saying Ensign, but when I was growing up, we called it the Ensign, so it's a hard habit to break. But this is the January 2005 edition of the Ensign, and I came across the article, the very first article in the magazine on page 3 is titled "Pursue the Steady Course." Now, it was written by the current Mormon prophet, and that is Gordon B. Hinckley. And as I browsed through the article, I came to a section called Pioneer Examples. In this section, the Mormon prophet uses the diary of his wife's grandmother as an example of pursuing the steady course, as what the title of the article is. Now, what really grabbed my attention here is that when I was reading this, which I'm going to do for you, I'm going to read a section out of that in just a moment. The Mormon Church uses their periodicals to rewrite their history. And what they've done here is just that. They have taken, and what this little story about it is this grandmother involved in the handcart trek coming across the plains to Salt Lake City. And that was the worst disaster of the Western pioneer emigration in America. But this magazine and the church promotes their handcart trek as an example of a wonderful success, which it was anything but. The truth is that the Mormon Church handcart scheme to cheaply move Mormon converts from Europe to Salt Lake City was the worst disaster in American pioneer emigration history, absolutely bar none. But Mormons and non-Mormons alike today don't know that because the Mormon Church has very, very successfully rewritten its history. So I'm going to take a look now and read for you a section out of this. And it's probably not good TV to do some reading, but I need to set this up so that then I can comment on exactly what they've done here. So it says, Pioneer Examples. Every man and woman in this church knows something of the price paid by our forebears for their faith. I've been reminded of this whenever I read the narrative of Mary Goebel Pay, my wife's grandmother. I think I would like to share a few words from that story of a 13-year-old girl. Now also, I can get the cameraman again to kind of zoom in here a little bit. When I read this, I want to set this up. See this picture that is here of this article, the girl, let me kind of get that over in the center. The girl there, you know, she's in rags and it's tattered and she's pointing over this wagon, but actually she was pulling a handcart. And she has this kind of pleasant smile on her face and she's pointing toward Salt Lake Valley. And you can see on her hands there, she's got just rags kind of wrapped around her hands, but she has this very pleasant look on her face and, you know, kind of half smiling and, you know, like there's Salt Lake and we're here. And well,
there's Zion.
Yeah, there's Zion. But you're going to see that this was a tragedy. And it was anything but a happy, you know, these people were not happy when they arrived in Salt Lake. They were in dire straits.
Mm-hmm. It might help to just explain real quick the difference between a handcart and a wagon.
Well, Helen's right.
It's
when she
real
said,
important because
you know, a handcart was just this thing on two wheels that it was about a 4x4 square box that they put their stuff in, and then it had a handle out in front of it, and they pulled it and pushed it across the plains.
They had no animals.
It was like an oversized wheelbarrow. Mm-hmm. You said it was a single wheel, a wheel on each side. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But he says here that he wants to share a few words from that 13-year-old girl. She tells of her childhood in Brighton, that delightful city on the south coast of England, where the soft green hills of Sussex roll down to the sea. It was there her family was baptized. Their conversion came naturally because the Spirit whispered in their hearts that it was true. But there were critical relatives and neighbors and even mobs to deride and inflame others against them. It took courage, that rare quality described as moral courage, to stand up and be counted, to be baptized and recognized as a Mormon. The family traveled to Liverpool, where with some 900 others they boarded the sailing vessel Horizon. As the wind caught the sails, they sang, "Farewell, my native land, farewell." After 6 weeks at sea, to cover the distance covered today by a jet plane in just 6 hours, they landed at Boston and then traveled by steam train to Iowa City for fitting out. That's Iowa City, Iowa, right up just across the river and over there in Iowa. There they purchased 2 yoke of oxen, 1 yoke of cows, a wagon, and a tent. They were assigned to travel with and assist one of the handcart companies. Here in Iowa City also occurred their first tragedy. Their youngest child, less than 2 years of age, suffering from exposure, died and was buried in a grave, never again visited by a member of the family. Now let me give you the very words of this 13-year-old girl as I share a few lines from her story. We traveled, this is quote, we traveled from 15 to 25 miles, that's 25 to 40 kilometers a day, until we got to the Platte River. We caught up with the handcart companies that day. We watched them cross the river. There were great lumps of ice floating down the river. It was bitter cold. We went back to camp and went to prayers and sang, "Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear." I wondered what made my mother cry that night. The next morning my little sister was born. It was the 23rd of September. We named her Edith. She lived 6 weeks and died. She was buried at the last crossing of the Sweetwater. We ran into heavy snows. I became lost in the snow. My feet and legs were frozen. The men rubbed me with snow. They put my feet in a bucket of water. The pain was terrible. When we arrived at Devil's Gate, it was bitter cold. We left lots of things there. My brother James, as well as he ever was, when he went to bed that night, in the morning he was dead. My feet were frozen. Also my brother Edwin and my sister Caroline had their feet frozen. It was nothing but snow, snow everywhere, and the bitter Wyoming wind. We could not drive the pegs in our tents. We did not know what would become of us. Then one night, a man came to our camp and told us Brigham Young had sent men and teams to help us. We sang songs, some danced, and some cried. My mother had never got well. She died between the Little and Big Mountains. She was 43 years old. We arrived in Salt Lake City, 9 o'clock that night, the 11th of December, 1856. 3 out of 4 that were living were frozen. My mother was dead in the wagon. Early next morning, Brigham Young came. When he saw our condition, our feet frozen, our mother dead, tears rolled down his cheeks. The doctor amputated my toes, while the sisters were dressing my mother for her grave. When my feet were fixed, they carried us in to see our mother for the last time. Oh, how did we stand it? That afternoon, she was buried. I have thought often of my mother's words before we left England. Polly, I want to go to Zion while my children are small, so they can be raised in the gospel of Christ, for I know this is the true church. That is a very sad story. And what I want to highlight here, and what is totally left out here, and what the church will never tell you is this. I'm going to put this up as our first slide here. This is a quote out of what's called the Forgotten Kingdom. That year, the children of Israel began to gather out of the European nations of Babylon to build up Zion in Western America by walking across the heart of the continent, pulling a few belongings in handcarts behind them. If heroic, the handcart emigration also produced the greatest, if least known disaster in the story of the nation's western migration, exceeding in lives lost the more famous Donner Party tragedy of 1846-47 by some 7 times. The Mormon handcart scheme was a greater disaster than the Donner Party 7-fold. No, you haven't, and you certainly won't hear that from the Mormon church history lessons or history lessons in general. Mormonism is all about rewriting their history, and they're quite successful at it. 41 people died in the Donner Party. That means that over 287 died on this trek, the worst disaster in American pioneer migration history. We all know about the Donner Party, but how many of you before this show right here have ever heard the disaster that the Mormon handcart trek was? And as we read in the article, 3 out of 4 people that didn't die out on the trail that finally made it into Salt Lake City, 3 out of 4, their legs or hands were frozen and had to have fingers and toes and legs and arms amputated because they were frozen. Well, now I want to remind you that Mormonism claims that their general authorities are oracles of God. Mm-hmm. Now we've shown on programs here, on several of our programs, that the Mormon Church believes that their prophet, as well as those called general authorities, are God's direct representatives. In fact, they believe that they are God's oracles on earth. So let's take a look at that hierarchy of Mormonism. These general authorities are the ultimate leaders of the Mormon Church. I'm going to put it up on the screen for you. This is how the Mormon Church pyramid of power is laid out. The prophet is at the top, and then he has 2 counselors under him, and then below that are the 12 apostles. And it's the quorum of the 12 apostles. And they're sometimes just referred to as the Council of the 12. Now these 15 men, the prophet, the 2 counselors, and then the 12 apostles, those 15 men are revered by Mormons as the oracles of God on earth. Now I want to take a look and show you that. This is right out of a student manual out of BYU. It says, men who receive revelations or oracles for the people are themselves called oracles. Members of the First Presidency and Council of the 12, because they are appointed and sustained as prophets, seers, and revelators to the church, are known as the living oracles. Now these 15 men, according to Mormonism, have a special spiritual endowment in connection with teaching and leading the people. And I'm going to put those slides up for you now. Although the church has many men who serve as general authorities, only the First Presidency and the quorum of the 12 apostles are sustained as prophets, seers, and revelators. It should be in the mind that some of the general authorities have had assigned to them a special calling. They possess a special gift. They are sustained as prophets, seers, and revelators, which gives them a special spiritual endowment in connection with their teaching the people. They have the right, the power, and authority to declare the mind and will of God to His people. Now those are some pretty strong statements about these men and what the Mormons believe about these men. Now, it's important for you to see that these men are sustained as prophets, seers, and revelators. And that the Mormons also believe that they have the right, the power, and the authority to declare the mind and will of God to the people.
And they also, let me just quickly interject here, they also believe and truly say that when a prophet of the church speaks, the thinking is done.
And all that you're supposed to do is listen.
Exactly.
That's it. Now Brigham Young ordered this means of migration, the handcart scheme. And I want to show you that so that there's no question there. That same month, Brigham Young announced a plan under the Perpetual Emigrating Fund to hurry up at the lowest possible cost the gathering of Israel from overseas, to collect those who could not afford otherwise to emigrate. He said, quote, "Let them come on foot with handcarts or wheelbarrows. Let them gird up their loins and walk through, and nothing," listen to this point, "and nothing shall hinder or stay them. In no other way could the honest poor be brought to Zion," he said. So Brigham Young ordered it. Brigham Young came up with the idea, he ordered it, and then he put an apostle, Franklin D. Richards, in charge of executing this plan. I'll put that slide up for you also. This is slide number 10. It says, "Oversight of the new immigration scheme fell to one of the faith's newest apostles, 35-year-old Franklin D. Richards, who had proved himself able to carry such responsibilities." Now, the first 3 companies, there was 5 companies in all. It looks like in my research that's what I came up with, and I'll do some more on this, and we'll do some follow-on shows. But the first 3 companies of handcarts started in June from Iowa City, Iowa, because the railhead ended in Iowa City. And then from there, they would get their handcarts made, they would load up all their belongings, and they would head out going west from Iowa City, Iowa. Again, because it was the end of the railhead. So the first 3 companies of handcarts started in June from Iowa City, Iowa. And they arrived in Salt Lake City the last week of September and the first week of October. The last 2 companies of handcarts, however, were late arriving in the States from overseas, from England, and they didn't begin their westward trek from Iowa City until July the 15th. And then as they left Iowa City, and then they got to what's called the emigration base on the Missouri River, which is right over the border between Nebraska and Iowa. Now, they didn't leave there until August the 18th. This was way, way, way too late in the season, and was a disastrous mistake, as we've already heard part of that account, in which I'm going to expound on here in a moment. Now, in this group, in this second group of handcarts that left way late, July the 15th, out of Iowa City, there was a seasoned pioneer in that group who was, his name was Levi Savage Jr., and he had marched 2,000 miles in 1846 from Council Bluffs, Iowa. That was the initial, when the Mormons left Nauvoo and headed across Iowa and winter encamped at Council Bluffs. He was part of the Mormon battalion. And so he marched 2,000 miles in 1846 from Council Bluffs, Iowa to Southern California with the Mormon battalion during the war with Mexico. Now, he spoke out against this late departure, and he warned that the handcart companies should not attempt to make the trip to Salt Lake City. Rather, they should ride the winter out and begin the trip in the spring. Now, this was wise counsel. He was a seasoned pioneer, and he knew it was not good to do this. It was way too late, and he tried to stop it. And what did the Mormon apostle Franklin D. Richards, a Mormon apostle, he is sustained as a prophet, seer, and revelator. He has the right to speak the mind and will of God to the people. What did he do about this opposition to his leadership and his divine word to head to Utah?
Well, these folks believed that he had direct communication with God.
Absolutely.
That he was speaking directly from God to them.
Brigham Young had ordered it, and he was just executing the plan, and He was an apostle. He had God's divine leadership. So this opposition, how did he handle it? Well, I'm going to put it up for you right now. This is slide number 11. On Loop Fork of the Platte River, Franklin D. Richards, in a comfortable mule-drawn carriage, overtook the Willie Company. That was the name of, there were two handcart companies out on the plains, those two. One was called the Willie, and the other was the Martin Company. So on the Loop Fork of the Platte River, Franklin D. Richards, in a comfortable mule-drawn carriage, overtook the Willie Company on August 26th. His heart had been warmed a few days before by Martin Company members who had given him cordial shakes of the hand with fervent "God bless you" as he passed. Hearing of Savage opposition, this was that pioneer, Levi Savage Jr., hearing of Savage's opposition to the late start, the apostle called a meeting of the Willie Company and, quote, reprimanded me sharply, unquote, the Ohioan said. So Savage was from Ohio. He was compelled to ask forgiveness, quote, for all that I had said and done wrong. So by opposing him, he had done wrong by opposing this Mormon apostle. I continue. Having corrected Savage's lack of faith, Richards hurried on to the territorial capital. Now, the territorial capital that you're seeing on the screen there is actually Salt Lake City. So having corrected Savage's lack of faith, Richards hurried on to the territorial capital, where he delivered the first news that 1,000 or more handcart pioneers were still out on the plains. Arriving just in time for Fall General Conference, Richards told the assembled faith on October the 5th that the immigrants under his charge, quote, feel that it is late in the season, unquote, and they, quote, expect to get cold fingers and toes, unquote. But, and this is again a quote, quote, but they have faith and confidence toward God that He will overrule the storms and turn them away, unquote, he said. Quote, that their path may be freed from suffering more than they can bear, unquote. When he had talked with the immigrants about the handcarts, he went on, he said, quote, or he went on, he felt, quote, felt to prophesy good about them. So this apostle meets with the handcart companies as they're going, and he proceeds on in his mule-drawn carriage into Salt Lake City. He gets up there at General Conference in Salt Lake and tells all the Mormons there that the pioneers are strong spirits and whatever, and they know it's a little late in the season, and they know they may get some cold fingers and toes. But I felt good to prophesy about them. Because why? He's a sustained prophet, seer, and revelator. Well, folks, this Mormon apostle had no clue what he was doing and what disaster he had led these unknowing European immigrants into. And this is evident by his disciplining of this Levi savage, who tried to warn him of the impending disaster. It was wise counsel. And what did wise counsel get this seasoned pioneer? A reprimand, and to ask for forgiveness for daring to challenge this Mormon apostle. The foolish statement made by Apostle Richards in Salt Lake City at the General Conference, where he said the immigrants, quote, expect to get cold fingers and toes, unquote, clearly shows that he was not led of God. His direction wasn't divine. It was all his own and led to the deaths and the maiming of hundreds. This is not the handcart history that you will hear from the Mormon Church. Mormonism is all about rewriting history. And I'm telling you, folks, coming here really soon, we're filming this right now. This is January of 2005. And in the summer of 06, in July of 2006, will be the sesquicentennial, the 150th year celebration of when those handcarts left Iowa City. And the Mormons never pass up an opportunity to rewrite history and promote their history as being divine and God-led and whatever. And so they are going to promote this handcart trek as this wonderful success, when it was the worst disaster in American pioneer history. 7 times worse than the Donner Party. But Mormonism is all about rewriting history.
What I'd just like to say is that those folks who came over, and I know we're running short, but those folks that came over here came believing that they were going to have wagons for them. Right. They did not know that they would arrive here and have nothing but a handcart with which to pull themselves to Salt Lake City. And Brigham Young did that to save money when they rode around in covered wagons themselves.
Yeah. And like I say, it was the worst disaster in American pioneer history. 7-fold times worse than the Donner Party. And this whole thing that I wanted to show you here is that Mormonism and its magazines and whatever is about rewriting history and trying to show themselves as being divinely led, and they are not. Their leaders are not divinely led. They are just simple men, and this absolutely proves it. Running out of time. Lord bless you. See you next week.